You are sitting on the edge of the hospital bed in room 412 when the door swings open without a knock, and a woman in a sharp navy blazer tells you that you need to be moved. Not asked, told. Her name tag reads Bettina Cross, Patient Services Director, and she is looking at you, the way people look at a piece of furniture blocking a doorway. Mildly annoying, easily relocated. "We have a more critical patient coming in," she says, already motioning to the orderly behind her. "Someone the board specifically requested this room for. I'm sure you understand. You are 78 years old, 3 days post-surgery, an IV line taped to the back of your hand, and you are being told that your comfort is negotiable in a building that exists, in no small part, because of a check you wrote 19 years ago. You look down at your hands, at the thin gold band you've worn for 51 years, and you say nothing at first. You've learned, over a long life, that silence often reveals more about a person than argument ever could. Bettina doesn't wait for your response. She's already tapping something into a tablet, murmuring instructions to the orderly, treating the room change as a logistics problem, rather than a decision that involves an actual human being lying in a bed with fresh staples in her hip. You didn't grow up with money. You grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Toledo with 4 siblings and a father who worked the line at a glass factory until his hands shook too badly to hold a wrench. Dinner some nights was bread soaked in gravy, stretched thin across 6 plates, and you remember your mother always taking the smallest portion and calling it just how she liked it. You learned early that dignity wasn't something anyone handed you. You built it, plank by plank, the same way your father built the porch swing that outlasted 3 Ohio winters before it finally gave out. You married young to a quiet, steady man named Gideon Marsh, a structural engineer with more patience than ambition and a habit of humming old hymns while he worked, with his hands in the garage. Together, you built a small manufacturing company from a rented garage into something that, by the time Gideon passed 12 years ago, employed nearly 300 people in your town. You never moved into a bigger house. You never bought a second car. Never took the vacations your accountant kept suggesting you'd earned. What you did instead, quietly, without press releases or plaques with your name in gold, was give. You covered a year of daycare for a young mother on the factory floor who was one missed shift from losing her job. You paid off a foreman's a medical debt after his son's leukemia diagnosis and never told him where the anonymous check came from. If stories like this move something in you, if you believe kindness and dignity should never expire with age, I genuinely ask you to hit that subscribe button right now before we go any further. Because there are so many people out there just like you and me. People who gave everything quietly and are still waiting for the world to notice. And this channel exists to make sure their stories get told. 19 years ago, when this hospital was drowning in debt and threatening to close its doors, a closure that would have meant a 90-minute drive to the nearest emergency room for half the county, you and Gideon wrote a check that kept the lights on. You remember signing it at your kitchen table? Gideon's hand resting on your shoulder. Both of you agreeing without much discussion that this was simply the right thing to do. Then 4 years later, when the hospital board came to you with blueprints for a new wing, a cardiac and geriatric care unit, the very department you are lying in right now, you funded nearly a third of it. Not because you wanted your name on a wall. In fact, you specifically asked them not to put your name on anything. You asked them to name it after the nurses who'd cared for Gideon in his final weeks. The Halcyon Wing, it's called now, after the hospice nurse who sang to him when the pain medication stopped working and words no longer reached him. But melody somehow still did. You have never once mentioned this to a doctor, a nurse, or an administrator during any of your visits here. You didn't come here for recognition. You came here to have a hip replaced and to heal quietly, the way you've always done everything, without fanfare, without expectation of anything in return. But none of that history is written on a chart. None of it is visible to Bettina Cross, who sees an elderly woman in a faded blue hospital gown, thinning white hair pulled back with a plain elastic band. No family hovering at the bedside. No expensive handbag on the visitor's chair. She sees, in other words, nobody. And so, when a donor's adult son, a hedge fund manager named Foster Ainsley, who twisted his knee on a ski trip and demanded the best room in the building for what amounts to a sprain, calls the hospital's new CEO directly, Bettina Cross does not hesitate. She has you moved to a converted storage room down the hall, a space so small your walker barely fits beside the bed, with a single flickering fluorescent light and a heating vent that rattles every time the system kicks on. The orderly who wheels you down the hallway is young, maybe 23, with kind eyes and an apologetic set to his shoulders. His name tag says Julius, and he keeps glancing back at you, like he wants to say something but doesn't know if he's allowed. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he finally says, as he parks your bed against the wall in the cramped room. "This isn't right. I told them the room's not even properly set up for post-op patients, but they said it was temporary." You tell him it's fine. You've said it's fine so many times in your life that the words come out smooth and practiced. A small kindness extended even in your own indignity, because you were raised never to make your pain someone else's burden. Before he leaves, Julius pauses at the door. "If you need anything, ma'am, I check this hallway a lot, even if it's not my rounds. It's a small thing. It costs him nothing. But in that moment, it is the only warmth in the entire building." That night, alone in that windowless room, you listen to the pipes, groan, and you think about all the years you spent making sure other people never had to feel this small. You think about the scholarship fund you started for factory workers' children, the one that's put 11 kids through community college so far. You think about the free clinic hours you quietly paid for at the community health center 2 towns over. You think about Gideon and how he always said that the truest measure of a person was how they treated someone who could do nothing for them in return, and you wonder, lying in a repurposed supply closet with a rattling vent and a call button that takes 11 minutes to be answered, what that says about the people running the wing he helped build. You think, too, about the day the wing opened, the ribbon cutting, the small crowd, how you stood at the very back near the coat rack because you didn't want your presence to overshadow the nurses being honored. Someone had asked you then if you wanted to say a few words. You'd declined. "This isn't about me," you'd said. It never was. Lying in that closet now, you wonder if that same sentence, spoken back then with such conviction, is the very reason nobody in this building knows your face today. The low point doesn't arrive as one dramatic moment. It arrives slowly, the way cold settles into a house with a broken furnace. It's the missed pain medication because the nurses simply forget which room you're in, since you're not on the official floor chart. It's the tray of cold, congealed food left outside a door because nobody thought to knock. It's Julius, the young orderly, standing in the hallway, arguing quietly with a charge nurse about why the woman in the closet room hasn't had her vitals checked in 6 hours. It's the moment you overhear Bettina Cross walking past your door with a colleague, laughing about how the old woman was very understanding about the switch, as if your silence had been agreement rather than exhaustion. You lie there and you feel something you haven't felt in decades. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of quiet grief for a version of respect you thought this building, of all buildings, owed you. You think about calling one of your old board contacts, picking up the phone and simply stating who you are, ending this in 30 seconds. Your thumb even hovers over your phone's contact list. But something in you resists, some old stubborn part of you that has never once used your name as a lever. Not even when it would have been easy, not even now. You think about the second time you nearly gave up that resolve, 2 nights in, when a new nurse comes in to check your vitals and, seeing the tiny closet room, mutters under her breath, "They really stuck you back here." Huh, with more pity than respect in her voice. You almost tell her then. The words sit right at the edge of your mouth. But you swallow them, the way you've swallowed so many truths in your life. Because somewhere deep down, you still believe people should be kind simply because it's right, not because of who might be listening. On the third night, when the pain in your hip flares up and the call button goes unanswered for nearly 20 minutes, you finally, reluctantly, ask Julius for your phone. Your hands are shaking, not from anger but from sheer depletion. As you scroll to a contact you haven't called in over a year, Odalis Reyes, the hospice nurse the wing is named after, the woman who sang to Gideon in his last days, and who left bedside nursing years ago to become the hospital's director of patient advocacy, a role that exists, ironically, because you insisted the new wing needed one. Odalis answers on the second ring, her voice warm and immediately alert the way it always was. Even at 3 a.m. with Gideon, when you tell her haltingly, embarrassed even now to be asking for help, what room you're in and why. There's a long silence on the line. Then she says very quietly, "Thea, Do you understand whose wing you're lying in right now? You hear her footsteps before you see her, quick, purposeful. The click of low heels on hospital linoleum that hasn't changed in 19 years. Dallas arrives within the hour, still in her coat. And the look on her face when she steps into that converted supply closet is not pity. It's fury, carefully controlled. The kind of fury that comes from someone who has spent her whole career fighting for people exactly like you and thought this particular fight had already been won. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She simply asks Julius to page the on-call administrator. And when Bettina Cross arrives, blazer still crisp, phone still in hand, Dallas asks her one question. Do you know who Thea Marsh is? Bettina's confidence falters for the first time, a small crack in the polish. She's a patient, she says. Room assignments are made based on... She's the reason there's a halcyon wing at all, Dallas says. And her voice doesn't rise, but it fills the small room completely. She's the reason you have a job here. She's the reason there's cardiac and geriatric care in this town instead of a 2-hour drive to the city. She asked specifically 19 years ago never to have her name on anything, because she didn't want to be treated differently. She didn't want special treatment, Bettina. She wanted the same basic dignity you'd give anyone, and you gave her a supply closet. You watch Bettina Cross's face move through several stages: confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looks almost like nausea. The particular horror of realizing you've humiliated the one person you most needed not to humiliate. She starts to apologize, tripping over the words, already reaching for her phone to reverse the room assignment, to move Foster Ainsley's sprained knee somewhere else immediately. But you raise a hand, and something in the gesture, calm, unhurried, entirely without malice, stops her mid-sentence. I don't need the room back, you say. Your voice is quiet, but it doesn't shake anymore. I need you to understand what you did. Not to me. I'll heal fine in a closet if I have to. I've slept in worse places than this in my life. I need you to understand what it means when the people running a building forget why it was built in the first place. That wing isn't there because of a number on a spreadsheet. It's there because of the nurses who sat with dying men at 3 a.m. and sang to them. It's there because a factory line worker's daughter believed. People who built this town with their hands deserved to be cared for when their bodies gave out. You looked at an old woman in a hospital gown and decided she didn't matter enough to keep her room. That's the thing I need you to sit with. Not me, that. The room is silent except for the rattle of the heating vent. Bettina doesn't try to defend herself again. She simply nods once, and for the first time since she walked in that first night, she looks at you, really looks at you instead of through you. The next morning, the hospital's CEO, a man named Prosper Ademi, who has run the hospital for 6 years, and who personally sat through the original wing dedication, comes to see you himself. He doesn't bring flowers or a fruit basket, which you appreciate, because you've never much cared for performative apology. He sits down in the visitor's chair, the one that barely fits in the small room, and he simply listens. He tells you Foster Ainsley has been discharged, that he checked himself out in embarrassment before anyone could ask him to leave. He tells you Bettina Cross has been placed on an improvement plan that includes mandatory training on the hospital's founding history and, at Dallas's specific recommendation, a rotation shadowing patient advocacy for a full quarter, so she has to sit with the people whose rooms she assigns instead of only their charts. He offers to move you back to room 412, and this time you accept, not out of vanity, but because Julius mentions quietly that the room has better light in the mornings, and something in you wants to feel sunlight on your face while you heal. Prosper lingers a moment before he leaves. For what it's worth, he says, I remember the dedication. I remember you standing at the back near the coats. I should have recognized you the moment I heard your name on the incident report. I didn't, and that's on me too. You tell him it's all right, not because it entirely is, but because you can see he means it, and you've never believed in punishing sincerity. Over the following days, something shifts in the building around you. Nurses who once passed your door without a glance now stop to ask how you're sleeping. Julius, the young orderly, starts bringing his lunch break to sit with you for 10 minutes at a time, and you learn he's putting himself through nursing school on loans, working nights to afford it, sleeping maybe 5 hours before his morning classes. You quietly, without telling him, contact the scholarship fund you started years ago and add his name to the next round of recipients, not because of what happened, but because he was kind when kindness cost him nothing and asked for nothing in return. And that has always been the only currency that mattered to you on your last day in the hospital. As Julius wheels you toward the discharge doors, you pass the small brass plaque near the entrance to the Halcyon wing, the one bearing not your name, but the names of nurses who cared for people at the end of their lives. Bettina Cross is standing near the nurses' station as you pass, and for a moment your eyes meet. She doesn't look away this time. She nods once, something like genuine understanding passing between you, the recognition, perhaps for the first time in her career, that every person wheeled through these halls carries a history invisible to a clipboard, and that the measure of an institution isn't what it says on a fundraising brochure, but how it treats the person nobody thinks is watching. You go home to the small house you've lived in since before the company sold. The porch swing your father once built for a different house, now hanging on your own. And you sit in the late afternoon sun with a cup of tea, your new hip aching in the particular way that means it's healing. You think about Gideon, about the hymns he used to hum, about the wing that bears the name of a woman who sang to him instead of the name of the man who paid for it. Because that was always the point. The point was never the money. The point was making sure that no one ever in that building had to feel as small as you felt in that converted closet, even for one night. A month later, you receive a letter from the hospital. Not a form letter, but one clearly written by Prosper Adeyemi himself, informing you that the hospital board has instituted a new policy. No patient room, reassignment for non-emergency, reasons without a documented case-by-case ethics review, and mandatory training for all. Patient services staff on the hospital's founding donors and their expressed wishes for anonymous, equal treatment. At the bottom, in smaller print, is a note that the policy will be informally known among hospital staff as Thea's rule. You didn't ask for that either. But you keep the letter anyway, tucked into the same drawer where you keep Gideon's old hymnal. Because some kinds of recognition you don't need to display. You only need to know they happened. A few weeks after that, Julius comes by your house unannounced, still in his hospital scrubs, holding a small card. Inside is a handwritten note thanking you for the scholarship, though he still doesn't fully know your role in it. The fund's coordinator had simply told him a longtime community donor had reviewed his file. You let him believe that. Some gifts are better left a little mysterious. He stays for tea, tells you about his coursework, about a professor who reminds him of Gideon somehow, patient and steady. You find yourself smiling more in that hour than you have in months. You think some evenings, sitting on that porch swing as the light fades gold across the yard, about how easy it would have been to simply demand your room back that first night, to say the 6 words that would have ended the humiliation instantly. I funded that wing myself. But you didn't, and you're glad you didn't, because what happened instead revealed something truer than your influence ever could have. It revealed exactly how that hospital treated people it believed had nothing to offer. And in the end, that was worth more to you than any room number. Because now, because of what you endured in silence, no one else who walks through those doors, without a title or a fortune or a familiar face, will ever be told so easily that they don't belong. Dignity was never something you were owed because of what you gave. It was something you were owed simply because you existed. And the day this world remembers that difference is the day it finally becomes worth the wings we build.